Hello and welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. My name is Julia Szaniszlo and I'm joined by my lovely fellow writer once again, Ryan Scott. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, hello. So, back in the autumn, Ryan wrote a very useful article on things which can ruin your training contract application. So, we're here today to bring you the slightly more positive end or version of that advice on things that can make your application stand out or help you when you're writing your applications. We know better than anyone really that writing these law firm applications when you're writing out 500 words of why law, why this firm, it can be really demoralizing, especially when your inbox piles up with rejections week on week. You can feel like you're doing everything right, but sometimes nothing seems to work. Obviously, lots of this is based on luck, but we're here to help you, hopefully, and bring you a few tips which can help your application stand out from the thousands that law firms sift through every application season. There are still lots of applications open, despite the fact that we're nearing the end of February. And a number of the firms with open applications will be in attendance at the Legal Cheek Spring Virtual VAC Scheme, which is happening on March 23rd to the 25th. So make sure you register to attend. There'll be lots of firms there that you can speak to and still make applications to. But without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Ryan now to kick us off with our first point. Ryan.
Oh, thank you very much for complimenting my article, first of all. I didn't know that was happening, but I appreciate that. Um, but yeah, I'd say the first point is to always anchor your argument in your experiences. So a good way to do that is to highlight an interaction you've had with the firm. So have you met them through a webinar, an open day, or a careers fair, perhaps? And then don't just mention that you've been to this open day. So if you're applying for, I don't know, I'm just going to say HSFK. That's an easy one. I'm applying to HSFK because I attended their open day. Okay, but what did you learn from that open day, and how does that relate to your motivations for applying? Thousands of people would have arguably attended HSFK's open day, but if you're not voicing what you learned from there, then there's really kind of no point in saying that you've done it. A good example of that for me was, and I think I've like labored on this point a few times in different podcasts, is that I was quite interested in the net zero transition. And it was after a webinar with the firm that I've now got a training contract at. It was a webinar with Legal Cheek, and I attended that back in 2024. After that, I kind of discovered an interest in renewables and things like that, did a lot more research, read some reports on their website. I also attended an open day with them, and I managed to speak to someone about projects work. Um, and it really informed my interest a bit more, and I could speak about it in lots more detail. So in my application to them, when asking about my motivations and things like that, and when talking about it through the assessment centre, um, I referenced the webinar and I explained why it was of interest, why it linked to why I was applying. Also, another example is I attended open days at HSFK and at Wilkie, and they're both discussed their work in competition litigation, something I know Julie is also interested in. I knew nothing about competition litigation beforehand, but I ended up doing a lot more research in it, reading some reports, speaking to trainees, like at a very basic level because I didn't understand it at the time, but I could still reference that conversation I had with a trainee or a lawyer in that area when applying, and also say that kind of speaking to them showed me, gave me a bit of insight into the culture of the firm, how keen everyone is to develop stuff like that. So realistically, I think highlighting any interactions you have just shows that you've gone beyond what the other candidates have done. You've gone beyond the website and you've actually shown a real interest in that firm because you've gone out your way. But yeah, I'd say that's it for highlighting an interaction. Julia, what's your next tip?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I think that is a really important point, and I can't stress how important it is to just even drop something in because firms will usually like chuck ones that don't have any reference to real life interactions out the window, given how many they receive. But I think the next one that is really important to stress is that when applicants are in the process of writing these really long applications, lots of the time, they tend to fall in or can fall into the trap of thinking that you have to show that you're as intelligent and as worldly as possible and use really complex vocabulary and technical language to demonstrate that. And first of all, you can usually write yourself into knots by doing this because you're not a lawyer. You are not qualified to use that terminology in a way that a lawyer might be able to, with years under their belt, years of experience under their belt. But also, one of the key things to remember is that a a key skill that a lawyer must possess in order to be good at the job is to be able to express themselves simply, clearly, and coherently. So if you express yourself in your application in the way that a lawyer would, you're going to be in a much better place. And what this means in practice is that when it comes to your motivations for wanting to be a lawyer, for being at a firm, for talking about your work experience, think of the simplest ways of expressing that idea, literally as bone dry and boring as possible. And then you can move on and maybe add some color and flair. But it is better to start from that point of simplicity. For instance, if you worked at JD Sports, say I worked at JD Sports on the shop floor, don't try talking about optimizing the shop floor or anything like that. Start from a simple position and then move upwards. I remember one of the first applications I wrote like 2 years ago, which failed magnificently, was to Farrah and Co. And they have a really long application form. There's a cover letter and there's a number of questions. So it's almost over 1,000 words. And I read back over it in preparation for this podcast. My God, was some of the language flowery and confusing. And what you do is you run the risk of not being able to get your point across. And we'll talk about clarity of reasoning later in the podcast. I think, Ryan, you're going to do that. But if you're not able to express your point simply in sort of one sentence, it probably isn't clear enough logically either. So you can add sort of evidence from, you can anchor your argument in experiences, as Ryan has just spoken about, but you can also express that in like one sentence. Say, I went to this event, I spoke to this person, I reflected on this, I then did this further research. Da, 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 da. Another thing, sort of in a similar vein, is that I think this applies specifically to the work experience sections. Don't add unnecessary bulk. Let's take the example of JD Sports. Let's say you were a manager there in some capacity and you were in charge of a bunch of different people. So you were sort of a line manager, let's say. Don't say, I was tasked with, or I had the opportunity to do this. Or if you've attended an open day, don't say, I had the opportunity to discuss XYZ with X partner. Just say, I met X partner. You have a limited number of words. And a graduate recruitment, when they see this fluffy language, are just going to go, oh, God, I can't be bothered. Next, clarity of expression is unbelievably key. So don't overdo it with flowery technical language, and B, cut the wheat from the chaff, in the sense of not adding unnecessary words or details that are just going to be a burden on graduate recruitment's already limited attention span. I can imagine they're reading thousands of these. What they want to get to is the content, and your clarity of expression coupled with good content will be a nice, a nice way of getting yourself across. Don't do unnecessary things. Don't make unnecessary journeys. Sorry. But that brings us to our next point. Ryan, what was your next point going to be?
Well, I was just going to bounce on the back of that one, actually, with writing and lawyer speak. Is you mentioned some words that I had the opportunity to. That is a throwback to what I would write in my old applications. And I also find there's an absolute stranglehold of the word facilitate using applications all the time. I helped facilitate, when facilitate means make easier. So to help make easier is kind of a tautology anyway. And regardless, and also you are writing to a grad rec team. Grad rec team usually aren't made up of qualified lawyers. So the way I've always thought of it is, don't speak to, I was going to say complicatedly, don't speak about legal concepts in a way that is completely unbeknownst someone who has never studied the law before. They're probably not going to be lawyers. If you're talking about some really complex, like, I don't know, competition litigation things, you kind of got to explain it like you're a teacher, I'd say. Like, make it simple, clear, and digestible. And also it's got to relate to obviously your motivations for applying the firm. So I think that's also like a reason why you got to write clearly. But yeah, on to the next point. Just, you need to evidence some clear motivation for that firm rather than a clear motivation for just corporate law generally. It's just about genericness. So I think one of the things you can do is always reference a specific practice area or a sector strength of that firm, or something unique that firm does that no one else does. I think one of the things you see really commonly is, and it relates to that flowery language from the last point, is referring to an international presence or full service firm or high caliber or precedent setting work. Most big city firms, unless you're applying to like a boutique, most big city firms are going to be like full service, high caliber, have lots of band one rankings, etc., etc. So try and find something very not necessarily niche to that firm, but something that firm really excels in. And I think the way you do that is by doing your research. So we spoke about this in a previous podcast on how to research a law firm, but you can look on the firm website. That's always a good starting point. Legal Cheek's firm profile is always a good starting point. Chambers and Legal 500 rankings to see where they're ranked in specific areas, and then you can kind of gauge what their specialism is and why clients come to them. Webinars. Legal Cheat does a lot of webinars with law firms, but firms will also host their own webinars occasionally. Podcasts. Ashurst has a fantastic podcast series I found. They speak to the trainees and ask trainees about their experiences, but there's also discussions of different practice areas within there and like big updates that are happening in those areas. And also reports on the website, as I say. If you can find a report related to something that you're genuinely interested in, and then talk about it like seamlessly integrate into your application, I think it shows that you've done a lot of research and that you are genuinely you care about this firm. But just relating to that point will be the fourth point is understand the logic behind the reasoning and the why behind the what. So you hear this from a lot of graduate people on like our legal cheat webinars when they're telling you how to succeed in an application. But everything you say in an application should explain the why behind it or how it relates to your application, your motivations for applying for that firm. So for example, I'm applying to insert Magic Circle firm here because you have lots of band one rankings. Okay, you say they have lots of band one rankings, but why does that matter to you? Is it the breadth of experience during the training contract so you get to do lots of different seats? Sure, and the knowledge that you'll get top tier training, top tier work, and working with the best practitioners in that field. Similarly, you shouldn't reference a deal for no reason. You shouldn't go on their website and just reference the first deal that pops up, the one that's most recent on their homepage, because you're not explaining why that's of interest to you or why it's motivating you to apply to them. We spoke about this in a previous podcast as well. I think it was the How to Research a Law Firm one. But if you are referencing a deal, I don't think you should just pick a deal because there's like maybe a big number involved or it's the most recent one they've done. So if it's like, oh, £1 billion acquisition or something like that, you'd be like, oh, that's interesting because there's a lot of money involved. If you can find a deal that's interesting because there's some nicheness to it, is nicheness the word? Nicety? Not niceties? Let's go for nicheness. I'm going to go for that. If there's some nicheness or really, I think it's a word, surely.
Do you know what? I think you've just coined it.
Well, if it isn't, it's in the Oxford Dictionary now. You should go for a deal because there's some nicheness to it or something that interests you about it, I'd say. Not just reference it because there's a big number involved or it's the first thing you've seen. I spoke about on the other podcast episode that I referenced the UK's first government green bond issuance, which is like a bond that's issued for like money to be spent on green projects. And it was the very first time they'd done it. It was precedent setting work. It was really interesting. There was like a big monetary value attached to it, but I just thought the actual kind of context behind it, that it's a foray into green stuff, was really interesting to me, related to the rest of my application about net zero transition and stuff like that. So find a deal that interests you if you want to reference the deal, but just make sure it relates to your motivations and you're explaining why this matters to you rather than just throwing it in there for the sake of throwing it in there. But with that, I shall pass it on to you, Julia, for the next tip.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a good idea to sort of lead off from what you just said about relating it back to yourself, because what I'm going to talk about is authenticity and making sure that your application is as unique to you as possible. And let's take the deal, for example. If you attended a webinar or if something happened in your hometown, I think you talked about an offshore wind farm.
That's really good memory. Yeah, a Hornsea 2 offshore wind farm. It's near where I grew up. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's take that example. You can talk about that because there's a personal connection to you, and that doesn't make it interesting, inherently interesting to you, but it's a jumping off point. And it's really useful to think about your applications slightly more as narratives. So if you say you attended an event, you heard them speak about something, you found that interesting, then you went and looked up that area of law and you found this deal. There's a continuity. That's what I did, for instance. I attended an event on competition with Weil. I went and looked into them. They had spoken about merger, like control processes, whatever. And I went and looked up their big case with Microsoft and Activision, and I spoke about that. a lot during the entire application process because I found it very interesting. And what was interesting about it was how many jurisdictions were involved, how contested the entire process was. So there was a point about it that was interesting legally, because it was, just very complex. There was a point where I could link it back to a specific experience of mine that at the same time also linked into an interaction with the firm. So it sort of did everything at once. And that was very personal to me. And I think that takes us to the next point, is that whether they're your unique motivations for wanting to join a law firm, your unique experiences in the legal and in the non-legal world, the best thing you can do in your application is be yourself, not for any cliche reason, but because no one else is like you. And so no one else is going to have the same motivations as you. Anyone can say that I want to go and be a corporate commercial lawyer because I'm interested in the intersection between law and business. That is a cliche, and it may be completely true. That may be exactly why you want to do it, but why? What experiences have you had in your life that have made that interesting to you? Have you read something? Have you attended an event outside the legal world? Have you, I don't know, been involved in a startup? Not everyone will have that. For me, it was obviously working here at Legal Cheek. That has opened my eyes to the legal world. And therefore, I talked about my job here a lot when I was applying to law firms, because I was able to say, look, I interacted with lots of law firms. I found it very interesting for this reason. It's developed my skills in a number of ways. And that's why I'm applying now. And let's take non-legal work experience. Not everyone's going to have a legal story to refer back to that is sort of professional, but that's completely fine because they're not expecting that from everybody. Let's say you work, the example I've been giving is working in a shop. There are so many things that you do. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit ill. There are so many things you do in a shop that are analogous to the work that you do as a trainee, working in a team, working under pressure, project managing, or juggling many things at once. And what you need to do is a solid understanding of the kinds of skills that trainee is going to need to possess in order to succeed in that role, and B, a clear understanding of the skills that you yourself have developed. So literally take a piece of paper, write down the skills that a trainee needs: the ability to work in a team, the ability to juggle lots of things at once, clarity of expression, perseverance, maybe, motivation, etc. And then write down all the things that you've done, whether that's in your committees at university, you've been, I don't know, secretary of something. Maybe you've literally just been a member of a society. Maybe you've worked in a Tesco. Maybe you've worked in a charity shop. Maybe you volunteered with at your parents' like local business or something. Literally anything is useful, and all that matters is being able to express it. And that is where that level of understanding will really help you, because you'll be able to express it very, very simply. And be proud of all of these things that you've done. I think I was saying that to Ryan earlier. Look, people can feel a little bit self-conscious about the fact that they've not worked in a pro bono clinic, or maybe they're a non-law student and they've literally only just sort of realized this is the thing that they want to do. And they've only realized because they've attended a bunch of webinars, but they've not done anything beyond that in the legal world. That's fine. Know that your non-legal skills are valued and explicitly valued. Graduate recruiters often say that these skills are, sometimes even looked upon not more favorably, but they tend to be more unique. Lots of people could have been a paralegal. Sorry, Ryan. But if you've done something really, really cool and unusual, then that's going to be really, really good, and that's going to look upon you favorably. I'm about to have a coughing fit, so do you want to move on?
I shall move on to the next one. It seems like you've got the leg. I had a case of the leggy, but luckily mine had disappeared by the time this podcast came along. But with that, I think a good idea is to use strong specific examples with the STAR method. We all know the STAR method is a situation, task, action, and result. Some people add an extra R on the end, so situation, task, action, result, relate, or a STAR link at the end. It's a good framework for answering any competency-based questions in an interview. And I think it works so effectively because you've got to remember that grad rec don't know you outside this application. I think some people describe their experiences in a very kind of loose or airy or abstract way. Like they'll talk about a society that's done at uni, like I don't know, the Cambridge University Taylor Swift Society. I knew quite a lot of people who were on that. But obviously, graduates don't know about that. They don't know what you've done. They don't know what you've arranged in that regard. They don't know how many members there are. You've got to explain all anything you reference in an application super simply, super clearly, and in just identifiable steps. So for me, I was on the Northern Society at uni, which was just a society full of Northern people. It was a small, the situation was it was a small society. There was no funding for the society. There was no recognition at the Freshers' Fair because we were so small, so no one really came and saw us. We had to grow the society to be able to receive funding from the student unions. That's like the task. We had to get student funding from the student unions to kind of expand, but we also had to grow the society first to unlock that funding. So how did we go about growing the society? We did a regular program of events. We did outreach to future freshers who were coming to the uni. So like completely new people who didn't know anything about the uni, we reached out to them and they joined us straight away. And we did a social media campaign as well. We did TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everything. And we ended up getting like 2 million views on TikTok, I think, across all of our videos. Some of them went a little bit viral. The result of that was our membership at least doubled that year. We had a much bigger platform at the Freshers' Fair near some of the other bigger cultural societies rather than like stuck at the miscellaneous category. And we unlocked some additional funding from the student union. So in doing so with the STAR method, it's a really easy way to take a situation that's very abstract, a situation that graduates don't know about, and then lead it all the way through to the result and show what you've done and kind of evidence that competence as well. Another thing you mentioned there, actually, Julia, was about non-legal work experience. That's obviously an extracurricular from university. I worked many jobs before I ended up getting the training contract I did. One of which was working at Tesco's during the pandemic, and I think there's a lot I can speak about there in as regards like working very like closely, and it was nice as well, so working closely with a team to adapt to new like regulations consistently, because I started in March all the way through till August, so lockdown regulations were changing, whether people could come in the stores, kind of regulating and policing that there's a 2 meter distance between all the people who were coming in the stores. It was constantly having to adapt, and that's a skill that I can talk about in application, working as a team with people who like obviously I've just met. There was lots of new hires during that time during the COVID era. um, so there's all these skills you can evidence, and I don't think having no legal work experience is a bad thing. I certainly didn't have any legal work experience until I paralegaled. I drew a lot on working in a call center. One of the best skills I have from that is being able to speak to people quite clearly. Um, Being able to speak to clients without like necessarily being very not being able to make small talk with them, I guess, and having people skills. I think that's one of the benefits of working in a call center. I think you feel that I definitely felt at the time that it was a bit unrelated to legal work. There's no legal analysis, there's no legal research there, there's no kind of like strong intellectual stimulation in these jobs. But the other transferable skills you're able to bring from that, graduates looking for very kind of they're looking holistically at who they're hiring. They want you to be a very well-rounded person. They don't just want you to be the cleverest of the bunch with a good degree. They want you to have other jobs you've worked or other extracurriculars you've done. They want to see you can work well as a team, that you're a pleasant person to be around, that you can interact with clients. Because at the end of the day, a law firm is a business and they make money by giving clients advice, but also quite a lot of the job as you go up there is business development with clients. So to show that you're a very well-rounded person is good as well. And you can do that with the STAR method. Um, and with that, I think we're moving on to our last tip, Julia, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've recovered from my lurgy attack.
Coughing fit.
Thank God. It will probably come back. But so you've gone through this entire process of writing your application. Hopefully, first top tip of this section is to do it as far in advance as you can. Do not write it the night before. It's not going to help you. It's not going to make you feel very relaxed. It's not going to give you the time to reflect on your answers and maybe work through your answers, because it's a process that, can take quite a while. I'm sure Ryan can attest to the fact that, you probably wrote some of your successful applications over the course of a couple of weeks, maybe even longer, and sort of agonized over separate sections of them. It can also get easier once you've written once you have a few set answers for certain sort of elements of your questions. There's no shame in reusing certain bits of your application. Not all of it needs to be tailored. So start as early as possible so you have time to reflect on it. And as Ryan helpfully phrased when we were preparing for this, make sure you seek alternative perspectives on your application. Now, what I mean by this is not necessarily just asking lots and lots of people to read it. A really useful thing that I found was speaking your applications out loud, because it really, really helps you to make sure that it sounds natural and like it's in your own voice. And sometimes when you're speaking, you're able to pick up on things that you might not do when you're staring at your laptop screen. I personally think I express myself a lot better in spoken word, ironically, given the fact that I did a literature degree. I can write myself into knots when it comes to talking about myself. I'm terrible at selling myself. I find it embarrassing and difficult. So it's easier for me to speak. Also, get other people to read them, whether that is your mum, whether that is a friend, a sibling, anyone, to get another perspective on it. But if you can, and I highly recommend this, get someone who has at least some bearing on the legal world, whether that's a future trainee, a fellow law student who's going through the same process, who's familiar with it. Get them to have a read through, talk to you about it, bounce some ideas off you, because sometimes they'll pick up on things that you just can't. Ryan read mine. He was very helpful. Thank you, Ryan. And one thing that I remember taking from like my GCSE Spanish teacher when it came to translations, I was writing translations, no, for A-levels, sorry. She said, write your translation and let it marinate for a few days. Don't touch it, then come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. I think the same can apply for applications. You get really stuck into the individual sentences and words and you go crazy. I remember I was writing an application for Travis Smith and it made me go insane. When I came back to it after like 3 days, it was so much better. But if you do that, if you start writing your application the night before, you don't have the opportunity to reflect, to talk it, to say it out loud to people, to give it to your mum to read or something, to let it marinate. So plan well and you'll be able to craft much more, well-styled, well thought out applications that actually reflect who you are and your experiences.
I really like what you said. There was some of the applications I did where I was working on them for 2 or 3 weeks, not because a 250 word answer takes me 2 or 3 weeks to write, but because I had so much to say and I'd done so much research because I was very passionate about applying for that firm as one of the top firms I wanted. Been so many open days, been so many webinars, but I only have 250 words to explain everything I want to. I think just sitting there night after night and staring at the screen for hours, like, where can I chop a word? Can this sentence go? Can this adjective go? Something like that, just to get down to the word count, was so unbelievably stressful that I got to the point where it was midnight before the deadline. I'm just randomly going through and thinking, this has to go, this has to go. Whereas if I give myself a bit more time before the deadlines to do it, and then just more routinely revisit it with a fresh pair of eyes, I think I could see, oh, well, maybe I don't need all this in there. Maybe I can trim the fat out of this a bit better. Or just having someone else to look over it can really help because it's more of an objective opinion, especially if, I mean, it's good to have someone who either works in law, who has got a training contract, who could review it if you have that possible. But also someone who doesn't work in law will have quite an objective viewpoint, I guess. Like, they won't know much about a training contract. So when they look through your application, they'd be like, oh, well, this isn't very clear what you mean here. And maybe they could help them say, cut this or explain this a bit better. But yeah, I like what you say about getting a fresh perspective. I think it's very important and just coming back to it with new eyes. But with that, I think that's all 7 of our tips done. Do you have anything else to add, Julia?
No, I think the it's a really hard process and it can be really demoralizing. So my sympathies go out to everyone who's going through it right now.
Mhm.
Especially given that we're sort of coming to the end of the bulk of the application cycle, it can feel, if you haven't really got anything just yet, just you can feel a bit hopeless. But I want to stress that part of the process is based on luck, and it is not a reflection of your abilities if you are struggling to get past this stage. As you can see, you can be an extremely capable candidate who, just if they don't explain themselves in the best way possible, in the most grad rec friendly, I suppose, way possible, you're just going to put in the no pile, even if you could do an excellent job as a trainee. That can sound really pithy, but just keep pushing. And if you are if you've sort of decided, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to come back and try next cycle, really plan your strategy, get a schedule out, make sure you have an idea of what firms you want, do your research, practice writing in this sort of very clear way. All that preparation will pay off at some point. If you've got what it takes, you will get there. You just need patience and a bit of grit. And I think, being a lawyer, you need a lot of patience and a lot of grit as well. So you're going to be doing that anyway if you become a lawyer. But yeah, make sure to register for our spring vac scheme, our spring virtual vacation scheme. There'll still be lots of opportunities there to make applications to these firms. So don't lose hope on that front. If not, breathe, take a deep breath. You'll be fine. And just take it one day at a time. It's hell out here. It's horror. It's hell out here, but we'll be all right. Ryan, any final words of encouragement?
Just that it's not wasted time if you don't get a training contract this cycle. As Julia says, there's still a lot of firms that are open, fantastic firms you can apply to, and they'll be at our law firm back scheme. However, I remember I didn't get any success in my first cycle. I had no clue what I was doing. Even though I went to uni for law, I didn't really know anyone who had done law before me, no one in my family or no one I felt comfortable enough to reach out to him, like, can you review my application, please? So that first cycle was just kind of like a guinea pig for me, I guess. I was just trying it out. If I got rejected, I got rejected. But then going back the next year, looking upon those old applications, thinking, wow, I really didn't write that well there. I didn't write that clearly. There's so much you can improve upon. Was very helpful. And not having that experience would have meant I was basically starting from scratch again with no reference point. I wouldn't have had the previous year's experience to see what to improve upon. So it's not time wasted. And go to the virtual back scheme and hopefully you get a training contract there. If not, we've got next year as well. And the average age of qualification for a solicitor in the UK isn't until 30 anyway. So you've got most of you listening will probably have a long time to go.
Yeah. Don't lose hope. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But we'll be back next week with another episode, hopefully. Thank you very much for listening and have a lovely rest of the day. Here it's 18 degrees outside right now. So I hope your weather is equally spring-like wherever you are in the world. Not the Southern Hemisphere. Sorry if anyone's listening from Australia. But it's bye from me. See you next week.
And bye from me.